Hello, my name is Lauren Davies and I'm a historian that's interested in the legal history of women. Today I'm going to be talking to you about two women that really did get a bit of a raw deal within the legal system of the Tudor period, especially focusing on the reign of Henry VIII. And those are Elizabeth Barton, the Holy Maid of Kent, and the radical reformer Anne Askew. We know that Elizabeth Barton was born in 1506 and that her execution took place at Tyburn on the 20th of April 1534. She was sentenced the previous year through Act of Attainder and received no trial. She was the only woman to have her head displayed on London Bridge, and her body is buried at Greyfriars Church in Newgate. Barton on the 20th of April was hanged alongside Edward Bocking, Benedictine monk of Christ Church, Canterbury, John Denning, Benedictine monk, Henry Gold, priest, Hugh Rich and Richard Risby, both Franciscan friars. Her vision started after illness in Easter 1525, which isn't a rare thing for mystics to say that has happened to them. If we think about Julian of Norwich, she started having her visions after a bout of the plague, and Marjorie Kemp received her visions after a difficult birth and subsequent illness after the birth of her first child. Now we know that after the Easter of 1525 and after some of the items that Barton allegedly prophesied came true, that Archbishop William Warham took up a commission to see if she was a prophet and if her teachings were within the Catholic Church. And it was decided that she was a woman of good living and that she was working within the teachings of the Catholic faith. So the main prophecies of remaining within the Catholic faith and making your pilgrimage to the Virgin Mary were two things that the Church are very keen on, and they supported her. So after this, she is then inducted into the Benedictine Order of St. Secular Priory in Canterbury, and her life becomes public. Now, she is revered by people like Thomas More at this point, who believes her to be a good woman of good living, and she then becomes known as the Holy Maid of Kent. In 1528, things move up a gear for her. She has a private meeting with Cardinal Wolsey, and after this meeting, she has two meetings with Henry VIII. At this point, Henry VIII accepted her visions and her prophecies, as he was still working within the Catholic faith himself, and it helped him keep rebellion at bay in his own country, because with what was going on in the rest of Europe with the progression of Protestantism. We know that she spoke to and sought counsel from two men during her lifetime, and those were Richard Reynolds and Bridgetine, monk of Sion Abbey. And it's quite strange to think of a prophet who had a direct line of communication with God, who God spoke with and gave her prophecies, to need spiritual advisors. But it's quite common. A lot of prophets did have spiritual advisors, in fact, all of them, and the spiritual advisors would be there to help them understand the visions and to dissect the visions and to speak about what God really meant for them in those visions. So what changed for Elizabeth Barton? Well, we know that her visions changed. Her visions became more chaotic, and they sort of challenged Henry VIII and his new marriage to Anne Boleyn, and she said that if he continued with his new marriage that he would die. But nothing happens to her straight away, and again I think this is because it's still all religiously delicate, and if you've accepted somebody to be a prophet of God, what would it cost you to kill them? What would that mean for your soul? So you can sort of see or potentially envision some sort of tension there about killing a religious person who has been not necessarily just useful, but has, her prophecies have come true. She has sort of spoken in line with how you would think God would speak, and so it would be quite complicated. But in this year between her vision starting to change and starting to declare the death of the king, Cromwell starts spreading rumours about her. He starts attacking her virtue. He starts claiming that she is having relationships with monks. So again, much like today, really, if you want to attack a woman, you attack her virtue, and also you attack her mental health. And it was really this and the spreading of this that really caused the Crown to act, and then to decide that enough was enough and that she needed to be dealt with. But again, if we go back to the idea of spiritual advisors, was she a victim of them misguiding her? And I think that really was the case. She was an early victim of the two warring factions that sprung up around the Reformation and the break from Rome. So she was forced to confess in 1533 that she had fabricated her visions. And what we know of her confession comes from Cromwell, which is really problematic, but we must accept it as true that she did confess. But there are many types of confessions, like we know. There are forced confessions, there are natural confessions. So, we have to take for granted that she did confess, but we also have to keep our mind open as to in what manner did she confess. So there was no trial, as I've said before, and the basis was that she had maliciously opposed the divorce of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. The act really did put Barton at the centre of things, and that was really easy to do if we think about it. Women are the originators of the original sin, and it's easy to think of a conspiracy coming up against the king being led by a woman, especially a woman that is claiming to speak to God. So if you move on to Anne Askew, she was born in 1521, and she was burnt at the stake and not hanged. She was tortured and executed, and alongside Margaret Cheyne, who was the only woman to be tortured as a result of the Pilgrimage of Grace in 1537, she is one of two women that were tortured by Henry VIII's regime. Also, one of the earliest known female poets, and the first woman to request a divorce on spiritual grounds as an innocent party. Now that is quite interesting because she married Thomas Kim, who was originally betrothed to her elder sister Martha, who passed away when Anne was 15. So again, she has the same legal grounds, broadly speaking, as Henry VIII to request a divorce. On being removed from the family home in 1545 for her radical Protestant beliefs, Askew moved to London, where she met like-minded people, including Anti-Baptists, one of those being Joan Bocher. While in London, she worked as a gospeller and preached all around London, all the while sticking to her maiden name. So we can see she's quite radical in that sense, quite a forward-thinking woman. But unfortunately, it is quite a small timescale when she does get her freedom. In March 1545, Kim has Askew arrested and returned to Lincolnshire, where she was pretty much imprisoned at home. And as you can imagine, it didn't last long. Early in March 1546, she was arrested and released. There was no torture, there was no... there is very little record. It doesn't seem that much happened at that point. But it was in May 1546 she was once again arrested. She was tortured in the Tower, and where they tried to force her to give the names of others, namely women, and that's the important thing, women that she thought felt how she did, and women that she consorted with, but she refused to do it to this point. Her torturers were Lord Chancellor Thomas Risley and Sir Richard Rich, and they personally used the rack. Now, this is quite interesting for me because normally it would be the Lieutenant of the Tower that would do this, and he set it all up. But the first time she cried out of pain, he went to see the king, and he was granted a dispensation from torturing her. But another thing that's interesting for me in this point is it made me think of Mark Sneeson, and where would they have got the idea to directly involve themselves in somebody's torture or in somebody else's pain. And Cromwell, that's where I'm thinking, which is, I can't offer you any definite answers in that, but it is something that sparked a question in my own mind, and I don't know if it would spark a question in yours. It's something that would require a lot of research, and even then I don't think that we'd get a definite answer. But when you think of the Lord Chancellor and his men coming to a torture, you don't think of them really taking off their cloaks and getting stuck in themselves. You think that they would be the ones asking the questions or taking notes or observing, being the king's witness to the torture, making sure it's all legal. But no, they did it themselves. So on the 16th of July, 1546, Askew was martyred in Smithfield, London. Contemporary reports describe that because of the torture that she received, that she had to be taken to the site of the execution in a chair. But the thing is we must remember Askew as a brave woman, a truly radical woman. She infuriated her torturers, repeating that she believed as the scriptures doth teach, which made it clear she would not accept non-scriptorial authorities in her own engagement with the scriptures, which meant that she would not accept members of the King's Council or members of the Crown legal system to tell her how to interact with the Bible. And we know that she infuriated them by quoting scripture at them when they asked her questions and using it to mock them. And it's important to remember just how intelligent you needed to do this, and to do it through pain as well. It's quite a remarkable thing. So this period in Tudor history by the historian Dermot McCulloch is described as legally strange and desperate. And it's true. As I've spoken before earlier in this talk, I've said that kings aren't generally described as tyrants. And that is true. If we think of tyrant kings, we think of King John first, and then we think of Henry VIII. But King John had to suffer consequence because of his tyranny. Henry VIII never really does. And he is one that does bulldoze the law. Kings are not above the law. They have to work within it. And these two women, outside of Henry's two wives that he executed, are examples of when he didn't work within the law. And also they're examples of women suffering for being different. In Barton's case, she was following a tradition of mystics who were treated much better than she was, and not as misguided as she was. I don't mean misguided in the sense that she herself misguided. She herself was misguided, but I do think that her spiritual advisors misguided her. And for Anne Askew, who is brilliant and intelligent and possibly had the intelligence of a man, equal to a man. So this is what we must remember when we think about the Tudor period, is yes, it's fantastic to think about these 6 women that married Henry VIII and to think of Elizabeth I and to celebrate their womanhood and what they did for it. But we must also think about the radical women, the women that were everyday women that operated within society, and in some cases operated out of the guidance that they had for their sex. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed my talk.